Hello, my name's Alan Mearns. I recently retired a few years ago from NOAA. I was with the oil spill response team, which was national headquarters in Seattle. Um, I'm going to present some information about a oil spill that happened nearly a quarter of a century ago that impacted thousands and thousands of marine mammals in Uruguay in South America. We're going to mainly focus on this cleanup of the seal and sea lion rookery at a place called Isla de Lobos. I'll show you where that is in a minute, in Uruguay. So let's do a quick overview. The event happened in February 1997, and over 4,500 South Atlantic fur seal pups died from heavy oiling at a major rookery in Uruguay. Three of us from NOAA went on scene from Seattle and from New York and helped support a non-aggressive cleanup campaign, mainly using peat moss. Lessons learned from this incident were used to establish protection and cleanup actions for the northern fur seal population in the Pribilof Islands, Alaska. So let's go right into it. I'm mostly going to be not too technical and show a lot of photos so that you can get the impression of what went on. Here's a little map of South America down to Uruguay in the lower portion there, and then the entrance to the Rio de la Plata, which separates Uruguay and Argentina. And at that entrance is a small island. On February 8th of 1997, there was a tanker, the San Jorge, that hit an unchartered reef, and it released 1.5 million gallons of medium heavy crude oil. And a few days later, the oil arrived along the coast of Uruguay, but especially on an island called Isla de Lobos, and where hundreds of 2 to 3 month old pups, fur seal pups, were oiled. On the 15th of February, the people that were at the scene at the time, not yet NOAA, did initial tests with peat moss to absorb the oil. You can see how terrible it was in that upper picture with the oiled fur seal pup on oiled boulders and cobbles. Finally, on February 21st, three of us from NOAA met on scene with other international experts. The other two people beside myself were Ed Levine. He was our scientific support coordinator in New York and speaks Spanish, and Tom Laughlin from National Marine Mammal Laboratory in Seattle. And Tom had, at that point, had just finished a book on the effects of oil spills, the effects of the Exxon Valdez oil spill on marine mammals. So we had some good expertise there. I have to remind you that it was February, but it was the summer and it was very hot down there. Just a note about fur seals and sea lions, and I'm sure you'll get more information during the conference. The South American fur seal, there's 160,000 seals on that island, a very small island, of which there were 32,000 pups that were born in November and December, a few months earlier. Fur seals have very thick fur. They are highly absorbent of oil, like sea otters. There were also South American sea lions on the island, 10,000 of them, and including 3,000 of their pups. Their fur is very thin. They are not as susceptible to oiling and oily impacts as are the fur seals. So there's a big difference there. I'm going to go through some photos that show what greeted the NOAA team on February 21st, 9 days after oiling of Isla de Lobos. Here's a scene as we crossed the island on foot, and looked out over the cliffs, and here we saw in the water thousands of seals. In this particular photograph, I actually stopped and counted them. There's about 300 fur seals swimming around close to shore, just beyond the waves. As we turn the view toward the rocky shoreline, you can see a couple of things of importance. First of all, there's oil smearing the rocks all the way up to maybe 10 meters above sea level. And there's scattered fur seals in this particular scene. There's also some gulls, many of which seem to be avoiding the oiled area. And then finally, something we saw several times a day, an oil tanker going by, not the tanker that spilled the oil, but you can see how close the transit route is to the island. Here's more scenes from that day we were on the shoreline. You can see the oiled boulders and material in the upper left, in the lower left, and then further up you can see heavy oiling on the boulders and on the cliffs. On the right, you can see we're now about 20 meters above sea level. You see these little brown objects on oiled rocks, and those are several hundred fur seal pups, 2 to 3 month old pups in that area. Here's a photograph that Ed took, my colleague, of a female suckling a young but oiled pup. On the upper right, you can see again that heavy oiled scene with one pup, and then a lower right, a pup with heavy oiling, but it's not in the heavy oiled area at that point. It must have got oiled somewhere else and then crawled away from it. Dead pups all over the place. There's a picture of a carcass that Ed took, and I'm showing you on the right a picture of an oiled sea otter. This happened to be at the Selendang Ayu oil spill in the Bering Sea about 15 years ago. I just happened to have this picture so you could compare both furry animals, both heavily coated with oil, both dead. We were involved in consultations when we arrived with Uruguayan experts, as well as experts from England and Canada and other countries. The first item was do not cause stampedes. When you have a colony as big as this, and we do elsewhere in the world, the last thing you want to do is have people around doing all kinds of things that cause the animals to stampede and move around, including killing each other. So no aggressive such as cleanup action, such as hydraulic or washing or pressure washing. And an exclusion zone, no press, no public access, no overflights, just cleanup personnel. We also spent some time evaluating alternative methods besides what I mentioned was the peat moss. I'll show you that in a minute. Bioremediation, there were vendors that showed up that had various products they wanted to apply to the shoreline. We had already had quite a bit of experience with bioremediation materials, and they were very slow, and they contain uncertain products, things that are cause for concern, such as foreign microorganisms. So no to bioremediation, no to chemical cleaners on the shoreline, yes to sorbents, especially Canadian peat, and also manual only cleanup, no heavy equipment, small teams with shovels, rakes, and sorbents. These were the internationally recommended methods. So here's another test of peat moss. There's a bag right there. Sprinkle it onto the surface, and here there's a rocky area on the left. It started to absorb oil right away. And on the right is pooled oil, in which peat was added, and it really sucked up the oil very quickly as well. So we'll see some more scenes here of how effective that was. We left after a 1 week visit, and just after that, finally, they started the cleanup with several teams of 3 to 5 Uruguayan Armada personnel. They began the month-long manual cleanup and removal of dead pups as well. The following photos are from Arturo Ponce de Leon. He was the chief mammalogist for the nation of Uruguay. And we had lots of consultations with him. Here's a crew bringing in from the mainland the bags of Canadian sphagnum sword, stockpiling it, getting it ready. There were about 60 tons that were brought in. And then Arturo took photos and sent them to us of the actual cleanup operations. Here's several gentlemen, some Armada personnel that are hand rubbing and wiping rocks with the peat moss, scraping it off, bagging it up, shoveling it up. And in some cases, there was woody debris that was brought to some fires that were burned and burning both the debris and what oil it contained. They also had another issue here with the thousands of cadavers of baby pup sea lions, fur seals. And here's just some scenes of that. They ended up with several cemeteries where they put the pups' bodies, added quicklime, and covered them. The quicklime, of course, would speed the degradation of the carcasses. Not a pretty scene. Rehabilitation, there were no rehabilitation facilities on shore, certainly not on the island. However, finally, 41 or 42 pups were sent to improvised care facilities on the mainland. After a couple of weeks, the survival was 3 of them survived. The completion of that primary cleanup with the manual / peat moss garden tool cleanup was on March 26. In total, there were 4,700 dead fur seal pups, 38% of pup population in the oiled area. Total dead adults was a lot less, 160. According to Mr. Ponce de Leon, the peat worked optimally in all cases. In terms of recovery, we're still trying to get information. Information faded away after a few months after the event, but there are records of positive recovery of the sea lions. And I should point out that the fur seals. I should point out that this colony was harvested. Pups were killed until the early 1990s, when finally that activity was stopped. But again, about 15% or so of the total island's fur seal pups had been harvested. That's a pretty naive term as far as I'm concerned, for decades prior to this. And then that process was stopped. So the oil spill, in the view of the managers, was kind of like a harvest. And so they treated it that way. When we got back and we started getting the final information from the response, we contacted the managers of the fur seals and sea lion populations at the Pribilof Islands in the Bering Sea. NOAA recommended stockpiling and maintaining peat, Canadian peat moss, and training local people in its use in the event of an oil spill. As of 2014, we looked up, and 20 tons are stockpiled at 2 locations on the Pribilof Islands. And there's a little table out of the wildlife protection guidelines at the Pribilofs revised as of July 2014. And there's a picture of the northern fur seals in the Pribilof Islands. So they were glad in a way that this happened, and we got some protection for our own fur seal colonies in Alaska. I have to add that the Isla de Lobos incident and fur seal colony cleanup was just part of what NOAA was involved in terms of response. The southern shoreline of Uruguay was oiled as well. Amenity beaches, tourism was impacted, marshes were hit, and so on. So we were also advising on those matters as well. I'd like to acknowledge a few people. There were actually 3 times as many people that we need to acknowledge. But first of all, Ann York, who was at the time with the National Marine Mammal Laboratory in Seattle, and she translated a final report by Arturo Ponce de Leon that we have. I'm going to make it available to you. I want to thank the United Nations Development Program for contacting the United States and for the U.S. to contact NOAA to get us to help out in this. I need to thank the Uruguayan Institute of Fisheries, NOAA, and of course colleagues at NOAA, and also Environment Canada, Gary Sergi, who helped speed the delivery of the peat moss to Uruguay. Here are some references, and I put them in their full here so that you can stop the presentation and actually download or copy the references. The 4 of them are in black and they're available. I'm actually going to make them available to Matt Bissell at Washington Department of Ecology. The one in blue I'm trying to get a hold of. I can't seem to find it, but it's a year afterwards. It's the damage assessment that NOAA participated in with the country of Uruguay. And so that's it. That's the end of my presentation. And you can contact me at alan.mearns@noaa.gov. I think I typed it in there in the PowerPoint. So thank you and take care.